The sky fortress of Iron Haven floated above a sea of dark clouds, and every day its metal walls shook under distant thunder and enemy fire. Below, the world was hidden by storm mist, while above, the watchtowers glowed with pale lantern light and long lines of smoke. Soldiers walked the ramps in heavy boots, and every face looked tired, tense, and ready for the next attack. The fortress was the last safe place for hundreds of people, and everyone knew that if it fell, there was nowhere left to run. That was the life Aki lived. He was a young recruit with black hair, thin arms, and a habit of lowering his eyes before anyone could judge him. He wanted to matter, but every lesson, every drill, and every test proved how weak he seemed beside the stronger fighters. Captain Cole, a broad man with gray hair and a tired face, led the defense with hard discipline because he had to keep people alive. Mina, a kind woman with brown hair and a medic badge on her coat, watched Aki with quiet concern because she saw how hard he tried. Far above them all, Commander Victor, a man with white hair, cold eyes, and a polished black coat, controlled the war machines attacking the fortress. He wanted Iron Haven destroyed because the fortress sat above a sealed chamber that held an ancient power, and Victor believed only he should claim it. If he reached that chamber first, the whole sky would become his battlefield, and every person in Iron Haven would be trapped under his rule. Aki learned the truth of his place in the fortress every day. He missed catches during training, he froze when loud alarms sounded, and he often arrived last when the others raced across the platforms. Some recruits laughed at him, while others simply ignored him, which hurt almost as much. Yet Aki kept showing up because he had nowhere else to go, and because Mina always told him that effort still counted, even when strength did not. Captain Cole did not treat him kindly, but he did keep him on the roster, which meant the captain had not given up on him completely. Then the siege began again in full force. Steel walkers rose through the clouds, their legs long and sharp, while cannon drones circled the fortress like angry metal birds. The first blast struck the outer wall, and the whole sky fortress rang like a giant bell. Fighters rushed to the ramparts, while smoke poured through broken plates and alarms screamed from every tower. Aki was sent to carry supplies, but the attack came so fast that the lower storage hall collapsed in on itself, cutting him off from the others. As dust drifted through the dark hall, Aki stumbled into a sealed chamber he had never seen before. In its center stood an old black blade resting in a stone cradle, covered in ash marks and warning seals. The air felt cold around it, and the strange relic seemed to watch him. Aki knew the stories. The weapon was called the Ash Blade, and the oldest guards said it fed on shattered memories and turned fear into force. They also said it was forbidden because it did not simply borrow pain, it made pain stronger. Still, the fortress shook again, and Aki, with his hands trembling, reached for it because he had no better choice. The moment his fingers touched the hilt, the chamber filled with a sharp red glow. Images slammed through his mind, not as full memories but as broken flashes. He saw his mother calling his name in a small kitchen, then saw that same kitchen empty and silent. He saw a younger version of himself hiding behind a door while people argued outside. He saw a day when he had tried to help during a prior attack, only to drop a tool and get someone hurt because he panicked. Those memories cut deep, and the fear inside him surged hard enough that the Ash Blade answered. Crimson energy burst from the blade and split the dust in the room, making the stone floor crack with a bright pulse. Aki fell back in shock, but the weapon stayed in his hand as if it had chosen him. The power was real, but so was the cost. Every time the blade fed, it pulled more pain from his mind, and the force grew stronger only when he faced what he most wanted to hide. Above the chamber, the fortress shook again as a giant war machine slammed into the outer wall. Captain Cole shouted for all fighters to hold the south rampart, but one section of the line broke under the pressure. Mina ran through the smoke with bandages and supplies, while Aki climbed back to the surface, still shaken and still afraid. When a steel walker smashed through a defense gate, Aki raised the Ash Blade by instinct. The fear in his chest exploded into power, and a wave of crimson force blasted the machine backward, saving several soldiers who would have been overwhelmed. Everyone stared at him in stunned silence because the weakest recruit had just done the impossible. That was the first spark, but it did not make things easy. The Ash Blade was not a simple weapon, and Aki could not control it by wish alone. Each time he used it, more memory fragments surfaced, and each fragment brought pain, doubt, or shame. He saw the faces of people he had failed to help before, and he heard the voice of his father telling him that fear was not the enemy unless it ruled him. Mina stayed close and helped him breathe through the shaking after each clash because she understood that power without care would break him. Captain Cole wanted the blade locked away because he feared its cost would consume Aki before the siege ended. But then another attack struck before any decision could be made. Commander Victor revealed a new war machine at the far edge of the clouds, a huge iron platform covered with spinning cannons and chained drill arms. Victor spoke through a tower horn and demanded that Iron Haven open the sealed chamber beneath the fortress. He promised that if the people surrendered the relic below, he would spare the upper decks. His voice was smooth and calm, which made his cruelty worse. The defense leaders finally understood that Victor already knew the fortress held more than a normal barracks. He wanted the chamber because it contained the Heart Forge, an ancient engine that could power endless war machines if unlocked. The Ash Blade was not just a random relic. It was the key that could open the final lock, and Victor had probably planned this siege from the start. When Iki heard that, he understood why the attacks had never stopped. The fortress was not being hunted for land or pride. It was being hunted for the secret buried under its feet. The truth hit Iki hard because the fortress had become his home even when he had never felt worthy of it. He remembered every person who had looked past him, every laugh that had cut him down, and every time he had wished he could disappear. Yet the more he thought about losing Iron Haven, the more he felt something new rising inside him. It was not just fear anymore. It was anger, care, and the need to protect people who were standing in the same storm with him. Mina saw the change in his eyes and told him to trust the pain instead of running from it. Captain Cole, though still wary, placed Iki on the front line because there was no one else who could carry the blade. The final assault began at sunset when the clouds turned red and black under the burning light of the siege. War machines climbed the walls, cannon fire shattered railings, and smoke rolled across the ramparts in thick waves. Iki fought with short, hard movements, each slash of the ash blade drawing more crimson force from the broken pieces of his memory. He saw his fear, named it, and kept going. He saw his failures, accepted them, and used them as fuel. Then Victor descended in a giant command frame plated with dark armor and bright engines, his face calm behind a visor of glass. He said Iki was a fool for carrying pain that did not belong to him. Iki answered that the fortress was built by people who carried pain together, and that was why it mattered. The words steadied him more than any lesson ever had. When Victor ordered the war machines to crush the south gate, Iki ran straight toward the impact. The ash blade flared so brightly that the air itself seemed to split, and crimson waves burst outward with every step. He did not fight like a trained hero. He fought like a scared boy who had finally decided not to back away. That choice made all the difference. The blade opened more memory fragments, and this time Iki did not reject them. He saw his own smallness, his loneliness, and his wish to be useful. He also saw the first day Mina had smiled at him, and the moment Captain Cole had kept him in the ranks instead of sending him away. Those memories did not weaken him, they gave him something to protect. The ash blade fed on that too, and its power turned fierce and clear. Iki leapt onto the ruined gate, carved a path through the smoke, and drove a shock of red force into Victor command frame. The machine staggered and crashed into the wall, forcing the enemy line to retreat in confusion. Behind him, the fortress defenses began to recover, and the sky filled with the sound of cheering voices. But the battle was not over yet. In the broken light, Victor smiled for the first time, as if the result had only confirmed what he already knew. He spoke the name of the Heart Forge beneath the fortress, and the floor below them began to rumble open. Iki gripped the ash blade tighter because he understood at last that the real war had only reached its next stage, and whatever waited below Iron Haven was now awakening.
The broken fortress of Iron Haven still shook from the clash above, and the night air carried smoke, dust, and the sound of voices that had only just found hope again. Torchlight flickered across cracked stone, bent railings, and shattered armor, while deep shadows moved under the steps and arches like they were alive. The survivors, soldiers, and helpers stood together in small groups, breathing hard and looking toward the same place, because they all understood the same frightening truth.
The stairs below Iron Haven were cold, steep, and narrow, and they seemed to swallow sound before it could reach the top. Red light from the cracked wall lanterns washed over the stone in thin strips, while shadows gathered in every corner like they were waiting for someone to make a mistake. He moved first with the ash blade held low, his dark hair damp with sweat, his battered cloak brushing the steps behind him, and his tired eyes fixed on the man ahead. Victor kept walking with his pale, long coat barely moving, his black hair neat, his face calm, and his voice quiet as if he already owned the darkness below. Nora followed close behind Iki, her silver hair tied back for work, her dark healer coat pressed tight under her light armor, and her sharp eyes measuring every wall, every sound, and every breath. Ben brought up the rear with his broad frame filling the stairwell, his brown hair showing through a dented guard helm, his scratched armor ready for a fight, and his steady hands prepared to hold the line if the passage collapsed or enemies rushed from the dark. The danger was clear now, and none of them needed to say it out loud. The Heart Forge was awake enough to call through the stone, and if Victor reached it first, he could claim the hidden fortress power for himself. That would mean control over the secret defenses of Iron Haven, control over the iron doors, the buried halls, and whatever ancient force had been sleeping under the stronghold for so long. Aki understood that this was not only about a weapon or a machine. It was about the future of everyone still trapped above, because if the Heart Forge opened the wrong way, Iron Haven could become a prison, a weapon, or a ruin. Victor had never hidden that he wanted power, but his true reason was colder than greed alone. He believed only one strong hand could guide the fortress, and he trusted no council, no oath, and no crowd. In his mind, fear made people weak and control kept them alive. That belief made him dangerous because it gave him a reason that sounded almost wise. Victor reached the first landing and stopped only long enough to place one hand on the wall. The stone under his palm gave a deep hum, and a line of old symbols flashed red for a single breath before fading again. He smiled without warmth and looked back at Aki. He told them the forge was responding to the ash blade, and that the blade was key to the old gates. Nora did not like the way he said it, because his voice carried too much certainty for someone who claimed to be helping. She stepped beside Aki and studied the symbols with a healer-esque careful focus. Then she noticed small marks cut into the wall near the old script. Someone had worked here before, not long ago. Ben noticed it too and tightened his grip on his weapon. He asked who had been below these steps before them, and Victor answered too quickly. He said the old guards had sealed this route long ago. But Nora pointed to fresh dust on the floor and to a broken iron nail caught in a crack. Those signs proved the passage had been opened again recently. That was the first crack in Victor's story, and Iki felt the truth shift under his feet like loose stone. Then the stairwell shook hard enough to make dust fall from the ceiling. A low thud rolled upward from below, followed by a blast of hot air that smelled like iron, ash, and something older than fire. Aki raised the ash blade, and the sword answered at once. Ember-orange lines brightened near the edge, and a faint heat spread through his hands as if the blade recognized the call from below. The glow lit Victor in pale firelight, and for one instant his calm face looked almost pleased. That changed everything. Aki saw that Victor had not been guessing about the forge. He had prepared for this moment. He knew the blade would wake the core, and he had brought the others here to make sure the path stayed open. Ben stepped in front of Nora when another tremor cracked the side wall, and a block of stone broke loose and smashed across the steps behind them. The passage did not fully collapse, but it made the message clear. The fortress was warning them to move faster or turn back. Neither option felt safe. They went on because there was no space to do anything else. The stairs widened into a lower chamber lined with iron rings set into the walls, each ring black with age and marked by old battle scratches. In the center stood a sealed metal door with a round socket in its face, and above it hung the carved crest of Iron Haven, worn nearly smooth by time. Nora moved closer and touched one of the rings without opening her hand wide, as if the wrong motion might trigger a trap. She explained in a voice soft but firm that the forge was not just a fire source. It was a heart system, a deep core that could wake the fortress defenses, move hidden doors, and lock down entire levels. She had studied old records above, and the records had said the Heart Forge was sealed because it did not only protect Iron Haven, it could also choose who was allowed to rule inside it. That was the real reason the old keepers hid it. If one person seized the core, the fortress itself might obey that person and shut everyone else out. Aki finally understood why this place had survived so many wars. It had not merely been strong, it had been guarded by a choice. Victor lifted his hand and admitted part of the truth at last, though only enough to keep moving. He said Iron Haven was already broken, already divided, and already close to falling into chaos. He claimed the Heart Forge had been sealed by cowards who feared using what they built. In his view, hiding power was the same as wasting it. If the forge could defend the fortress, then someone had to awaken it before enemies came for the ruins above. His words sounded sharp and controlled, but Iki saw the deeper hunger inside them. Victor did not want to save Iron Haven first. He wanted to decide its shape. He wanted a fortress that would follow him, obey him, and never question his orders. That made him a danger even if his warning about the coming threat was true. Nora turned from the door and told Iki that Victor was not lying about the danger, only about his purpose. Ben agreed with a short nod. He had fought enough battles to know the difference between a man who protects and a man who takes. Iki moved toward the sealed door, and the ash blade grew warmer with each step. When he placed the blade close to the socket, the ancient symbols around the door flashed one by one, as if the fortress had been asleep and was now opening one eye. The chamber answered with a deep metallic groan, and a narrow line appeared down the center of the door. Before it could open fully, another sound rolled through the stone below them. It was not a collapse, and it was not the scrape of a weapon. It was worse because it sounded like something huge shifting in its sleep. The floor trembled, the iron rings rattled, and a pulse of heat swept through the chamber so strong that Ben had to brace both feet. Nora called for everyone to stay back because the forge was reacting to the blade faster than she expected. Victor did not move away. He stepped closer instead, his eyes locked on the opening seam, and for the first time his calm broke just enough for Iki to see hunger in his face. Then the twist hit them in the worst possible way. The forge was not waking because the ash blade was simply a key. It was waking because the blade was part of the same system, a lost piece of the same old power, and Victor had known that all along. Nora realized it at the same time Iki did, and her eyes widened as she remembered the old records. The Heart Forge had once been split from its bearer to keep one person from ruling too much. The sword had been broken away, hidden, and passed from hand to hand until only the ember lines remained as proof. That meant Iki was not only carrying a weapon, he was carrying a missing piece of Iron Haven itself. Victor smiled again, but now it looked certain for a far darker reason. He had not guided them here just to unlock the forge. He had guided them here to make Iki reveal what the blade truly was. If Victor could control the sword and the core together, he could command the fortress without anyone else standing in his way. He felt the room tilt inside his mind, yet he did not step back. The truth hurt, but it also gave him strength because now he knew why the blade had always felt alive in his hands and why the old stone had answered him in silence long before this descent. He was not chosen because he was the strongest. He was chosen because he was willing to carry what others feared. Ben stepped closer to Iki, placing his broad body between Victor and the younger man, while Nora raised one hand and began to trace a small protective seal in the air, ready to shield the team if the chamber erupted. Victor finally showed a harder edge and told them to move aside before the forge locked the door forever. He said the fortress needed a ruler, and he was the only one willing to become it. Iki answered without shouting because he did not need to. He said Iron Haven needed a guardian, not a master. That simple answer changed the air in the chamber. For the first time, the forge lights flickered unevenly as if the ancient power itself was listening. The sealed door then opened 1 inch, and a strip of white hot light spilled across the floor like a blade. Deep below that opening, something massive turned in the dark, and every carved symbol around the chamber began to glow in a slow ring. Victor reached toward the door, but Ben lunged in and forced him back 1 step. Nora shouted for Iki to hold the blade steady because the core was sinking to him, and if he pulled away now, the whole chamber might lock again. Iki planted his feet, tightened both hands on the ash blade, and stared into the growing light as the Heart Forge finally began to answer. Above them, Iron Haven shook once more, and far away in the upper halls a warning horn began to sound. The fortress had sensed the awakening, and whatever waited on the other side of the door was about to decide the fate of everyone inside. Iki did not know yet whether he was opening a path or waking a monster, but he knew one thing with absolute clarity. The true test had only just begun, and there was no going back now. The lower chamber of Iron Haven glowed like a furnace breathing in the dark, and the hot light moved across cracked stone, iron rings, and old battle marks. Dust fell from the ceiling in thin sheets, and the massive forge door stood at the center like a sleeping giant with its eyes shut tight. Aki kept both hands on the ash blade, which hummed with a faint heat, while Nora stayed close to the wounded with calm, sharp focus, and Ben planted himself between the door and the rest of the room with his broad shoulders set like a wall. Above them, the fortress kept shaking, and the warning horn still echoed from the upper halls, which told everyone the same thing in the same plain way. Iron Haven had felt the awakening, and now every person inside was in danger if the wrong power came through the door. Aki knew the stakes right away because the Heart Forge was not only a tool. It was a core system for the fortress, a hidden power that could call up defenses, seal corridors, and wake old machines. But if its rules were broken, it could also turn those same systems against the people meant to survive behind them. Victor had made that danger worse by pushing Aki toward the opening because Victor wanted the forge active for his own plan. He was a man with black hair, a pale long coat, and a calm cold face that never gave away panic. He believed control was everything, and he wanted the Heart Forge because it could give him control over Iron Haven itself. That was the reason he had stayed patient, watched from the shadows, and waited for this exact moment. The glow at the center of the forge door brightened, then pulsed once like a strong heartbeat, and the sound made everyone flinch. The round socket in the middle of the sealed metal door began to turn slowly, as if an unseen key had found the right shape in the dark. Aki stepped closer, tired but determined, and he felt the ash blade pull in his hands as if it recognized the same hidden force. He had dark hair, dust-covered traveling clothes, a battered cloak, and eyes that looked worn from long nights, yet he still stood forward because the people behind him needed someone to keep moving. Nora watched him with silver hair tied back neatly, a practical dark healer coat, light armor pieces, and alert eyes that missed nothing. She was smart, careful, and driven by one simple goal, which was to keep the wounded alive and uncover the truth before the fortress crushed them all. Ben, with brown hair, a broad frame, and scratched guard armor, stayed ready to protect anyone who could not protect themselves. He had a steady stance because that was who he was, a loyal guard who would hold the line even when fear started to spread. Then Victor stepped out from the shadow of an iron pillar, his pale coat catching the glow, and he looked almost peaceful as he spoke. He said the Heart Forge was never meant to be hidden from the world forever. He said Iron Haven was built not just as a fortress, but as a lock. And he said the lock needed someone strong enough and clever enough to open it before the upper halls collapsed and buried them all. His words sounded useful, but Nora saw the real shape under them at once. Victor was not trying to save the fortress. He was trying to own the thing that controlled it. Aki did not answer Victor right away because the room itself answered first. The symbols carved into the walls began to glow one after another, and a low iron hum moved through the floor. The sealed forge door released a deep sound, not a scream and not a groan, but something older and heavier, like a giant turning in sleep. Then the door split open by a few inches, and hot orange light spilled through the narrow gap. The air changed at once, growing hotter and thinner, and everyone took one step back except Aki. Inside the gap, they saw moving shapes made of iron arms, ringed gears, and heavy chain links hanging in slow motion from the dark ceiling beyond. The Heart Forge was waking in pieces, and its first movement was not wild. It was careful, almost thoughtful, as if it were checking whether the people before it were friends or intruders. That was when Nora noticed something carved into the side wall near the door, a line of old symbols she had not seen before. She brushed away dust with 2 fingers, leaned in, and read the pattern as best she could. The meaning hit her hard enough to show in her face. The Heart Forge responded only to the ash blade because the blade was not just a weapon. It was a key made from the same old metal code that guided the fortress long ago. Aki looked down at the blade, and for the first time he understood that he had been carrying a lock and a warning at the same time. Ben asked the question everyone feared. If the forge was waking because of the blade, then what else had the blade been made to open? No one had a quick answer, and that silence made the chamber feel smaller and more dangerous. Before anyone could speak again, Victor made his move. He reached into his coat and pulled out a thin iron ring covered in matching runes, a backup control piece that proved he had prepared for this moment long before the others knew the truth. He told them he had found records in the upper archives, records that said the Heart Forge could awaken the fortress defenses and seal every breach in Iron Haven. But those same records also said the forge would choose one master voice if it woke under the right command pattern. Victor wanted that voice. He wanted the fortress to obey him because he believed only ruthless control could stop Iron Haven from falling into ruin. That was his motive, plain and cold. He was afraid of chaos, afraid of the fortress collapsing, and afraid of losing power in a world where power decided who lived safely behind stone. So he was willing to rule the place if that meant no one else could break it. He slid the ring toward the opening in the forge door, and the whole chamber jolted with a hard metallic shock. Ben lunged first, catching Victor before the ring could fall into place, and the two men slammed into a wall of iron, dust, and sparks. Nora shouted for a key to hold the blade steady because the glowing symbols were changing fast and the heart forge was now reacting to their conflict. Aki raised the ash blade with both hands, feeling the heat climb through the grip and into his arms, and then the room answered with another beat of light. The open crack in the door widened just enough for a wave of hot wind to blow across the chamber, and in that wind Aki heard something that made his breath catch. It was not a monster roar, and it was not a machine sound. It was a voice, deep and calm, speaking from inside the forge itself. The voice said Aki had come at the wrong time, but perhaps not for the wrong reason. That single line changed everything because it meant the forge was aware, and it meant the fortress had been waiting for someone like him. Victor stopped struggling for 1/2 second, and that was enough for Ben to drive him back from the door. Victor stumbled, caught himself, and the cold calm on his face finally cracked into real anger. He snapped that Aki was a fool if he trusted a machine built by long-gone hands, because old powers always hit a price. Nora, still reading the symbols, realized the greater truth before anyone else did. The Heart Forge was not a simple engine under Iron Haven. It was the fortress heart, yes, but it was also a judge. It would not just power defenses, it would test the intent of the person who woke it. If that person wanted safety, the fortress could shield the people above. If that person wanted control, the fortress could lock itself down and turn every corridor into a trap. That was the twist hidden inside the old design. The power was not only in the forge, the power was in how it answered the heart of the one who held the key. Aki felt the meaning of that truth settle into him like a heavy stone. He had not been chosen because he was the strongest. He had been drawn here because he was the one willing to carry fear and still move forward. He glanced at Ben, who was bruised but standing. He saw Nora, who was still thinking through danger faster than it could spread. He looked at Victor, who wanted to use the fortress as a weapon of control. And Aki finally understood the real choice before him. He could open the Heart Forge fully for power, or he could guide it carefully and risk losing the chance forever. The chamber shook again, harder this time, and a shower of dust rained down from the ceiling. A warning light flashed red along the far wall, then a hidden set of iron bars dropped halfway in the passage behind them, cutting off the stairwell path. Somewhere above, the horn sounded again, louder and closer, which meant panic was spreading through the upper halls. Ben moved at once to the blocked passage, forced the bars apart just enough to check the route, and called out that people above would need the fortress defenses soon, or the shaking would trap them in broken corridors. Nora crouched beside a wounded guard lying near the wall, pressed a cloth to his arm, and told him to stay awake because the worst danger was still coming. Her voice stayed steady even when the room kept trembling. Victor took one slow step back, and in his eyes Aki saw a new idea form, colder than before. If he could not command the forge directly, he could still wait for it to weaken the others. He could still use the confusion. He could still take the final control when the chamber opened wider. Aki saw that clearly, and it made him stronger instead of weaker. He lifted the ash blade toward the glowing crack, and the sword answered with a bright ember line along its edge. The forge symbols around the door lit up in a chain, one after another, like a path being drawn for him. The voice inside the forge spoke again, asking a simple question that seemed to shake the bones of the fortress. Would Aki protect the people of Iron Haven, or would he claim its power for himself? He did not know the full answer yet, but he knew the one thing that mattered. He would not let Victor make that choice for everyone else. Aki stepped forward, and the ash blade sank point first into the round socket at the center of the forge door. The fit was perfect, and the room went silent for one sharp breath. Then the glow burst outward in a wave of gold and ember light, racing across the walls, through the iron rings, and into the hidden systems of Iron Haven. The fortress answered at last. Deep locks began to turn far above them, old rail lines started to move behind walls, and distant stone channels opened with grinding force as the hidden defenses came alive. Ben looked up in shock as the floor steadied under his boots, and Nora felt the air shift as the chamber stopped collapsing around them. Victor, seeing the controls slip away, reached for the ring again, but the forge rejected him with a violent burst of heat that drove him back several steps. He did not fall, but he lost the chance to touch the door, and for the first time he looked unsure. He felt the power rushing through the blade, but he also felt something else. The forge was not obeying him as a master. It was listening to him as a guardian. That was enough for now. Yet the voice inside the chamber did not finish its test. It only opened the next path. A new passage began to form beside the sealed door, hidden under layers of stone that had never moved for years, and cold air poured out from beyond it. Nora stared at the opening and whispered that the real core of Iron Haven must be deeper still. Ben tightened his grip on his weapon and said they would have to move fast before Victor regrouped. Victor, now standing in the ember light with anger hardening his face again, said the same thing in a very different way. If the lower core was deeper, then the one who reached it first would decide the fate of the fortress. Aki held the ash blade tighter, looked into the dark passage ahead, and took the first step toward whatever waited below, knowing the true test had only just begun, and the next chamber would answer questions none of them were ready to face. Aki moved into the dark passage below Iron Haven, and the cold stone stairs swallowed the sound of every step. Red lantern light flickered weakly along the walls, while iron dust clung to his cloak and boots. Behind him, the fortress above still groaned with distant cracks and fading battle noise, but down here the world felt sealed away, silent and old. The lower stairwell was narrow, steep and rough, built for people who expected danger long before they ever saw it. Aki knew that Victor wanted this place for one reason only. The lower core could wake the fortress defenses, and whoever held it first could command the iron doors, hidden paths, and buried weapons of Iron Haven. That was why the chase mattered. That was why this chamber could decide everything. Aki held the ash blade in both hands, feeling its warm ember lines pulse against his palm, and he kept going because turning back would hand Victor the future. He was tired, covered in dust, and badly outnumbered, but his eyes stayed forward because fear had no place in the next room. Nora followed close behind him, careful and alert, her silver hair tied back so it would not catch on the stone. She wore a dark healer coat under light armor plates, and she moved like someone who always noticed the small details before the large disaster. Nora was not a fighter in the same way Ben was, but she mattered because she understood wounds, traps, and old systems better than most soldiers ever could. She wanted to keep her friends alive, and she wanted to learn the truth of the fortress before Victor twisted it into a weapon. Ben came behind her with his broad frame filling the stairwell, his brown hair damp with sweat, his scratched guard armor turned toward the dark like a shield. Ben was loyal, steady, and built for pressure, and he mattered because he could stand in front of danger when others could not. He had already taken enough hits for the group above ground, and still he kept moving without complaint. He looked down at Aki and said in a low voice that if Victor reached the lower core first, then every door in Iron Haven could become a trap. Aki nodded once because everyone understood the stakes now. This was not only about winning a fight, it was about who would control the fortress that had sheltered people for generations. The stairwell opened into a wide underground chamber, and all three of them stopped at once. The room was called the Iron Haven Lower Chamber, and it looked like a place made for both work and warning. Heavy iron rings were set into the walls, old battle marks crossed the stone, and a sealed metal door stood at the far end like a guard that had never moved. Strange symbols glowed faintly around the frame, and the air carried a dry heat that did not belong underground. Aki felt the ash blade pull toward the door as if the sword recognized something ancient and dangerous. Nora stepped closer to the wall symbols, and her eyes widened as she saw that the carvings were not random marks. They were directions, warnings, and control signs, all made to guide a person who carried a matching key. Ben lifted his torch higher and found claw-like scorch marks across the floor, signs that something had tested this chamber before. Then Victor entered behind them, calm as ever, his black hair neat even in the dust, his pale, long coat trailing like a quiet threat. His sharp features held no panic, only the same cold focus he always wore when he believed the board had become clear. He did not rush, he did not shout. He simply looked at the sealed door and said that the Heart Forge was finally close enough to matter. He explained, in a voice that sounded almost patient, that the fortress was too broken to protect anyone by chance. In his mind, only one strong hand could guide it, and if he could not do that, then Victor would do it himself. That was his motive, and it made terrible sense. He believed that control would bring order, and order would save what was left of Iron Haven. The problem was that Victor was willing to decide who counted as worth saving. Aki stepped in front of the ash blade and told Victor that Iron Haven was not his to command. Victor answered with a thin, cold smile, and for the first time the anger beneath his calm showed through. He said the fortress had already chosen sides and anyone who hesitated would be crushed by what woke below. Then he reached toward the center socket of the sealed forge door, but the symbols around the frame flashed brighter, as if the chamber itself refused him. Nora shouted that the door was not just sealed, it was keyed to the ash blade and to one other truth that they had not yet understood. Before anyone could move, the symbols lit all at once, and the heavy door gave a deep metallic groan. The room shook, dust fell from the ceiling. A line of light spread across the floor and touched the sword in Aki's hands. The ash blade grew hotter, and images seemed to stir in the metal, images of a forge deep under stone, of rings turning, and of people long gone placing a burden into the fortress on purpose. Aki felt his mind tighten with the first real clue of the twist. The heart forge was not only a weapon, it was also a lock. It had been built to keep something from waking unless the right person, with the right blade and the right intent, stood here together. That meant Victor could not force it open alone, no matter how hard he tried. The truth hit harder when Nora found the final mark on the wall and read it aloud. The lower core did not answer to power alone. It answered to a bond, a shared command, and a choice made under pressure. The fortress had been designed so that one greedy hand could not control it by force. Aki stared at the glowing symbols and understood what that meant for him. He had not just been carrying a sword. He had been carrying part of a promise made by the builders of Iron Haven, people who expected the fortress to outlive them and protect others from tyranny. Victor clenched his jaw, and his plan changed in an instant. If he could not simply claim the forge door, then he would pressure the others until they failed together. He stepped back, raised one hand, and sent a sharp pulse through the chamber that struck the iron rings in the walls. The rings answered with a heavy hum, and hidden mechanisms started moving under the stone. One side of the room opened with a grinding roar, revealing a narrow side passage lit by weak orange fire. From inside came the sound of footsteps, then the flash of metal, then the first sign that Victor had brought backup through the fortress tunnels. Ben moved first, planting himself between the new threat and Nora. Aki lifted the ash blade, and its ember lines burned brighter, ready to answer. Victor did not look surprised. He looked satisfied, as if the real test had finally begun. He told Aki that if he could not defeat pressure, confusion, and fear, then he had no right to stand before the Heart Forge. Then the passage filled with armored figures, and the chamber became a maze of light, shadow, and rising danger. Aki felt the old fear return for one sharp moment, but this time it did not freeze him. He had been trapped before by doubt, by exhaustion, and by the weight of wanting to protect everyone at once. Now he understood that strength was not only about striking first. It was about staying honest when the room tried to break you apart. He shouted for Nora to watch the symbols and for Ben to hold the left side of the chamber. Nora instantly moved to the wall, tracing the glowing marks with careful hands, while Ben slammed his shoulder into the first armored attacker and drove him back from the center path. Their teamwork had become their shield. Aki met the nearest threat with the ash blade, and the sword rang against steel with a bright burst of ember light, forcing the figure to retreat. The chamber flashed with heat and shadow, and the forge door behind them began to respond again, pulsing as if it were listening to the rhythm of the fight. Then Nora called out the next revelation, and her voice cut through the chaos. The symbols were not only a lock, they were a map. The hidden chamber beyond the forge door could not be opened by force, but it could be opened by alignment if the correct signals were sent through the iron rings in the right order. That meant the battle was not only against Victor, it was a race against the chamber itself. Aki turned, saw Victor watching from the edge of the light, and realized the man had wanted this exact pressure all along. Victor was trying to force everyone into a mistake so he could claim the opening after they failed. Aki tightened his grip, steadied his breath, and stepped toward the glowing wall as the lower chamber trembled around him. He was no longer just following the path downward. He was beginning to understand the fortress, and that understanding could be the one thing Victor had never planned for. The next chamber waited behind the sealed door, and whatever came next would decide whether Iron Haven remained a shelter or became a cage. The lower chamber of Iron Haven felt like a buried lung, cold and tight, with old iron dust drifting through the red lantern light. Cracked stone walls pressed in on every side, and the sealed metal door waited ahead like a silent judge. Aki stood in the center of that heavy dark, a young man with dark hair, dust-covered traveling clothes, a battered cloak, and tired eyes that still refused to give up. In his hands, the ash blade gave off a faint orange glow, warm against his palms and steady enough to calm his breath. Behind him, Nora watched with sharp, silver-haired focus, her dark healer coat and light armor set for quick help or quick warning. Ben stood near the wall, broad-shouldered in scratched guard armor, ready to shield the others if the chamber turned hostile. Victor remained farther back, black-haired and pale in his long coat, calm in the way only a dangerous man could be calm. He wanted control, not safety, because he believed Iron Haven could only survive if every door and every person obeyed one ruler. That was the real danger now, and everyone in the chamber knew it, even if they did not say it aloud. If Victor reached the Heart Forge first, the fortress might become a cage for every soul still inside it. Aki did not rush. He had learned that rushing inside Iron Haven only helped Victor. He stepped closer to the glowing wall and raised the ash blade until the ember lines along its edge matched the symbols carved into the stone. The blade hummed softly, almost like it was listening. Nora noticed it first and narrowed her eyes. She was careful by nature, the sort of woman who trusted patterns before promises, and she had come into the fortress to protect the wounded while also uncovering the truth behind the old seals. "The blade is answering the wall," she said, her voice low but clear. Ben shifted his stance and glanced between Aki and the door. He was the kind of man who did not need fancy plans to know when something mattered, because he guarded people for a living and understood danger in his bones. Victor watched too, and for the first time a small crack appeared in his perfect calm. He had expected fear, confusion, and delay. He had planned on people panicking when the chamber trembled. But Aki had stopped fighting the fortress like it was only a wall. He was starting to understand it as a living system, one that reacted to intent, rhythm, and the old marks left by its builders. Aki slid the ash blade across the center of the glowing wall, and the symbols lit up one after another, as if waking from a long sleep. The sealed door answered with a deep metallic groan. The floor shuddered beneath their boots, and the iron rings in the walls began to vibrate. A hidden line of light ran through the stone, crossed the chamber, and stopped at the round socket in the center of the forge door. Aki took one careful breath and felt the meaning of it settle in his chest. This was not just a lock, it was a test. The Heart Forge was built to respond to the one who understood the fortress, not the one who only wanted to own it. That made Victor dangerous in a different way, because Victor wanted to force the system into obedience before anyone else could use it. If he succeeded, he could shut the lower levels, seal the upper halls, and control who stayed safe and who was left outside. Nora moved closer to Aki, silver hair brushing her cheek as she leaned toward the wall. She had begun to notice small signs during their descent, tiny clues that the fortress did not respond to force the way a normal building would. "The symbols are older than the war marks," she said. "This place was made to hide something, but also to choose someone." Ben frowned. "Choose someone for what?" Nora looked at the glowing socket. "For the Heart Forge." Victor heard every word, and his pale face tightened by a fraction. He had known about the forge longer than he had admitted. That was the hidden truth driving him all along. He did not want mere safety. He wanted the power source under Iron Haven because he believed the outside world was too broken to trust, and he believed only a sealed fortress could keep people alive long enough to rebuild. To him, freedom was too risky. Control was mercy. That belief made sense in his mind, and that was what made him so hard to stop. The chamber shook harder, and from the stairwell behind them came the sound of stones sliding against stone. The lower passage had begun to close. Victor had set more of his plan in motion than anyone had seen, and the trap was now swallowing the last safe exit. Ben moved first, stepping between the others and the dark corridor, his scratched armor catching the lantern light. He was loyal to the core, and though he had been wary of the secrets under Iron Haven, he had chosen the people over the fortress. "We are running out of time," he warned. Nora knelt beside the floor markings and touched one line of carved iron with her gloved fingers. She did not panic, because panic never healed anyone and never solved a sealed door. Instead, she studied the pattern and found the missing shape. "Aki," she said, "the blade is not just opening the door, it is matching the heart mark. The fortress is waiting for a command, but not from force, from balance." Aki looked at the ash blade, then at the socket, and then at the wall where the symbols had first lit up. He realized the fortress had been built by people who feared exactly what Victor had become. They did not want a ruler. They wanted a guardian, so the blade, the door, and the chamber were all parts of one test. He stepped forward and placed the hilt of the ash blade into the socket. The fit was instant. Light surged through the door in a clean orange line, then spread into bright runes around the frame. For one sharp moment, the whole chamber glowed like a furnace waking after a century of sleep. Then the forge door opened inward with a heavy, echoing sigh. Beyond it lay a vast lower hall built from ancient stone, iron rings, and massive support arches that vanished into darkness above. The heart forge sat at the center, dormant but immense, like the sleeping core of a giant machine. Broken battle marks covered the floor around it, proof that people had once fought hard to protect this place. Iki stared at it and felt both wonder and fear. Nora felt the same, but she also felt hope because her healing work had taught her that even broken things could still serve a purpose. Ben lowered his weapon a little, not in surrender but in respect. Victor, however, stared like a man looking at a locked door that should have belonged to him. That was when the first true twist struck them all at once. The Heart Forge was not only a power source, it was also a safeguard, and the old symbols around it showed that it could seal Iron Haven from the inside if misused. Victor had not simply been seeking control of the fortress defenses. He had been trying to close the entire stronghold and turn everyone inside into a protected captive community. In his mind, that was the only way to save them from the world beyond the walls. He believed the outside would eventually break all defenses, so he wanted to stop people from ever leaving the safety of Iron Haven again. Iki understood the terror behind that choice, but he also understood its cost. A home that cannot open is only a prettier prison. Victor raised his hand and gave the first command he had been saving for this moment. The old rings in the chamber began to hum, and hidden shutters far above started to close. Iki moved before the chamber could fully respond. He had been tired when he entered the lower levels, tired in body and spirit, but now the purpose in him was stronger than fear. He lifted the ash blade free from the socket, and the light around the forge door flickered. The fortress staggered, caught between Victor and the blade, between lock and release. Nora shouted for Ben to hold the side passage, and Ben lunged into motion, driving back the falling debris with brute force and timing. He was not trying to win glory. He was trying to keep the others alive long enough to choose the right path. Iki faced Victor across the glowing floor. Victor looked furious now, but not wild. He still believed he was right, and that was what made the clash so dangerous. "You do not understand what is coming," Victor said, voice flat and cold. "The world above is falling apart. People will panic. They will turn on each other. Iron Haven can survive only if it is sealed." Iki shook his head, and the tiredness in his face gave way to something harder. "A place that shuts out everyone becomes a grave for trust," he said. "You are not protecting people. You are taking away their choice." Victor's jaw tightened because he knew Iki had reached the heart of the matter. Nora saw it too. She had been worried from the start that the fortress secret would split the group, and now she could see the truth clearly. Victor was not lying about the danger outside. He was only wrong about the answer. The answer was not fear. It was shared strength. Iki turned the ash blade toward the heart forge, and the blade answered with a deeper glow, as if the weapon and the forge were made to speak to each other. The chamber answered with a low, rising hum, and the ancient symbols began to shift. Then the forge did something none of them expected. A hidden panel behind the core slid open, revealing a narrow stairway that climbed upward into darkness. Nora gasped softly. Ben took one step forward. Victor went still. The secret was clear now. The Heart Forge was not only a lock and not only a weapon. It was also a guide, built to lead a chosen guardian toward the upper command paths of Iron Haven. Someone long ago had planned for this fortress to be defended, changed, and kept open to the right hands. That meant the next chamber was no longer the end of the problem. It was the beginning of a larger one. Iki understood at once that the fortress had more layers than Victor had counted on, and that Victor had underestimated how deeply the old builders valued balance over control. The hidden stairway waited like a new choice, narrow and dark but full of promise. Somewhere above, other systems were waking now, and if Victor could not claim them, he would try to break them. Iki looked at Nora, then Ben, then finally at Victor. He saw fear in Victor, but also a strange kind of hope that had been twisted by years of caution. Iki did not forgive him, not yet, but he did understand him a little better. That understanding changed Iki in the deepest way. He was no longer just a traveler chasing a secret blade. He was becoming a guardian of the fortress, someone who had to protect people without letting fear rule them. He tightened his grip on the ash blade, stepped toward the new stairway, and listened to the chamber behind him continue to tremble. The Heart Forge had awakened, but Iron Haven was still not safe. Whatever waited above would decide whether the fortress became a true shelter or a final cage, and Iki was already moving toward the answer. The stairwell below Iron Haven was cold, narrow, and full of old iron dust, and the red lanterns along the wall gave only weak light. Their glow shook with every deep rumble from the Heart Forge, and the whole fortress felt like it was holding its breath. Iki moved first because he had learned that fear could not be allowed to choose the path. He was a young man with dark hair, dust-covered traveling clothes, and a battered cloak that hung from his shoulders in torn folds. His eyes were tired, but they stayed hard and focused as he held the ash blade in both hands. The sword was still glowing faintly, and its ember-orange lines matched the low heat that pulsed through the metal. Behind him came Nora, a woman with silver hair, a practical dark healer coat, and light armor pieces that let her move fast. She was careful by nature, but she wanted to protect the wounded and understand the fortress secrets before they hurt anyone else. Ben followed close after her, a broad man with brown hair, scratched guard armor, and a steady stance that showed years of duty. He wanted one simple thing above all else, and that was to keep people safe. Above them, the stairwell led toward another hidden level, and all three of them knew that whatever waited there could decide the fate of Iron Haven. The first shock came when the next landing opened into a narrow control room carved into the stone. Ancient iron rings lined the walls, and old battle marks cut across the floor like deep scars. In the center stood a tall frame with moving gears, broken levers, and a round socket that matched the shape of the ash blade hilt. One side of the room had a cracked viewing panel that looked out into the lower chambers, while the other side held the sealed forge door, a massive metal barrier covered in glowing runes. Iki stopped at once because the room did not feel abandoned. It felt waiting. Nora stepped beside him and read the symbols with sharp eyes, then frowned when she saw how the runes linked the forge door to the Heart Forge below. She explained in a calm voice that the fortress was built with a layered command system, and that if the core power woke fully, the upper defenses could either open the stronghold to save people or shut it down around everyone inside. That was the real danger now. If Victor seized control, Iron Haven would stop being a refuge and become a prison. Ben clenched his jaw at that truth because he knew what trapped people did when they started to panic. The old fortress would not stay peaceful for long. Then Victor stepped out from behind the tall frame, and the room changed at once. He was a man with black hair, sharp features, and a pale long coat that moved with quiet control. His face stayed calm, almost gentle, but his eyes were cold and certain. He was not here by accident, and he had never been merely chasing the fortress for treasure. He wanted the Heart Forge because he believed the world outside Iron Haven was too broken for freedom to survive. To him, people made terrible choices when they were afraid, and only strict control could keep disaster from spreading. He wanted the fortress systems locked under one mind, his mind, because he truly believed order would protect everyone better than trust ever could. That belief made him dangerous because it gave his actions a clean surface while hiding a hard and ruthless core beneath it. He looked at Iki and the ash blade, then at Nora and Ben, and spoke as if they were all already part of his plan. He said the fortress was never meant for wandering hearts, only for a steady hand. Iki answered that a shelter without freedom was just another cage. Victor did not raise his voice. He only reached toward the round socket and said the world did not deserve choice if choice always led to ruin. The room exploded into motion before anyone could say another word. Ben lunged forward to block Victor, and the two men crashed shoulder to shoulder in a hard clash that shook dust from the ceiling. Nora moved to the side at once, not to fight but to reach the control frame, because she saw that the runes were starting to brighten. Iki brought the ash blade up between himself and the socket, and the sword suddenly burned hotter, as if it recognized the room. The weapon reacted to the symbols in the wall, and for one tense moment the old forge system answered back with a deep mechanical groan. Victor had planned for this. He had already set the room to respond to the blade, because he knew the ash blade was the key that could wake the fortress command path. He had not been waiting to win by force alone. He had been waiting for the right moment to make the fortress obey him. Nora shouted for Iki to pull the blade away from the socket before the control frame locked. Ben kept Victor busy, pushing him back step by step, while Victor moved with careful precision and tried to bait them into wasting strength. His goal was not simple violence. He wanted the fortress network under control because then he could seal the stairwells, close the upper gates, and keep every person inside under his command. He believed that was mercy. That belief made him almost impossible to persuade. Aki looked at the ash blade and then at the glowing runes, and that was when the first true revelation struck him. The blade was not only a weapon, it was a key, and more than that, it was a witness. The worn hilt and ember lines matched the ancient symbols because the blade had been made for the same system that built Iron Haven. Someone long ago had not hidden the sword to destroy the fortress. They had hidden it to prevent a future ruler from locking the people inside. Aki suddenly understood why the blade had led him here through so much danger. It had never been calling him to power. It had been calling him to responsibility. He gripped it tighter, lowered his stance, and made a choice that changed him. He had once wanted answers for himself and maybe even wanted to prove he was special. Now he wanted only to protect the people behind him, even if that meant giving up the easy path. He shouted for Nora to find the rune that controlled opening instead of locking, and he told Ben to drive Victor away from the socket, not to chase him down. Ben obeyed without a word because he trusted Iki now, and trust had become their strongest weapon. Nora worked fast under the flashing light, her silver hair catching the glow as she leaned close to the wall. She found a hidden line in the symbols, one that ran under the others like a quiet path buried beneath fear. The fortress was built with two commands, she realized. One command sealed the gates when danger came from outside. The other command opened the heart roots and spread power to safe chambers when protectors were present. That second command had been hidden on purpose because the people who built Iron Haven feared that future leaders would choose control over care. Victor heard her speak, and for the first time his calm expression tightened. He did not like secrets that he had not found first. He tried to reach the forge door socket again, but Ben crashed into him with enough force to drive him back from the frame. The old guard showed no fear as he planted his feet and held the line. His broad shoulders strained, his scratched armor ringing under each impact, yet he refused to step aside. He was not fighting for glory. He was fighting because people depended on him to stand his ground when the room shook. The Heart Forge answered all of this with a deeper pulse, and the sealed door trembled in its frame. The glowing runes changed from harsh red to a steadier orange, and for a breath the whole chamber seemed to listen. Aki pressed the ash blade into the socket only halfway, following the hidden pattern Nora called out, and the sword sang with a low heat that spread through the metal wall. The control frame shuddered, then turned. Far above them, iron gates inside the fortress began to move, but not in the way Victor wanted. Instead of locking every path, the hidden system opened several old routes that connected the lower shelter rooms to cleaner air and safer halls. Dust poured down from the ceiling, and a long-forgotten set of lanterns lit one by one through the walls. Victor stared at the change with open disbelief. His plan was slipping away, not because he lacked intelligence, but because he had built his whole idea on one false belief. He thought people needed to be ruled in order to be safe. The fortress itself now proved something else. It could defend people best when they were allowed to move, choose, and help each other. Victor backed toward the stairs, his face still cold but now sharp with frustration. He warned that freedom would bring chaos, and that chaos would break everything the moment the outside world came knocking again. Aki did not chase him. That was the second change in him, and it mattered just as much as the first. He had started this journey with anger, doubt, and the need to prove himself. Now he understood that a guardian did not win by chasing every enemy at once. A guardian stayed where the people were most vulnerable. So he planted his boots, kept the ash blade steady, and watched the new routes open around the lower chamber. Ben moved immediately to the far side of the room to check the newly unlocked passage. Nora rushed to a broken side alcove where she found old supply crates, healing cloth, and water stores that could help any wounded survivor still trapped in the fortress levels above. The three of them worked like a team now, each using a different kind of strength. Aki covered the room, Ben secured the passage, and Nora made sure the people would have what they needed when the fortress finally changed. That was when they heard another sound, softer than the forge pulse but far more troubling. It came from behind the sealed forge door, a slow metallic knock that did not belong to the room they had entered. Whatever remained beyond that door had also awakened, and it was listening now. Aki tightened his grip on the ash blade and turned toward the sound, knowing the next choice would be even harder. The fortress was opening, but its deepest secret was still waiting, and Victor, though forced back for the moment, had not vanished from the story. He had only retreated into the shadows with a plan of his own. The lower chamber of Iron Haven felt colder than the air above it, and the silence there was so deep that even breathing seemed loud. Old iron rings sat inside the stone walls, cracked battle marks crossed the floor, and red lantern light shook faintly over the sealed forge door. Aki stood near the center with dust on his face, a battered cloak around his shoulders, and the ash blade glowing low in his hand. He was tired, but his dark eyes stayed sharp because he knew the fortress was not empty anymore. Nora stood beside him, a woman with silver hair, a practical dark healer coat, and light armor that made her look ready for danger. She studied the glowing runes around the door because she wanted answers more than comfort, and she could already tell the chamber was warning them of something old and powerful. Ben, a man with brown hair, a broad frame, and scratched guard armor, kept his body between the stairwell and the others because his job was simple and serious. He wanted to protect his friends, and he knew Victor would return if given even one small opening. Then the knock came again, slow and heavy, and it did not sound like a hand at all. It sounded like metal meeting metal from the other side of the world. Aki lifted the ash blade higher, and its ember-orange lines brightened as if answering the sound. Nora looked at him and said the door was linked to the fortress core, which meant the heart forge was stirring under their feet. That mattered because if the core fully woke in the wrong hands, every hidden defense in Iron Haven could turn against the people above. The problem was now clear, and it was worse than they feared. They were not just trapped in a chamber. They were standing beside a sleeping machine of war, and something inside it had just opened its eyes. Nora knelt close to the runes and traced the carved lines with careful fingers, while Ben watched the stairwell and listened for footsteps. She explained what she had already learned from the walls of Iron Haven, and her voice stayed calm even when her eyes did not. Long ago, the Heart Forge had been built to protect the fortress, feed its locks, and call hidden systems when danger came. But it had also been sealed for a reason, because the old rulers feared that anyone greedy enough could use its power to control the whole stronghold. That was why the forge door had no ordinary handle and no simple key. It needed a living bond, something that could wake it without breaking it apart. Aki felt the heat of the ash blade rise in his palm, and he understood at once that the blade was not just a weapon. It was a key forged from the same lost power. He had been carrying it since the first part of this journey, but now he finally understood why it always reacted to iron walls, hidden halls, and strange seals. The blade was made to answer the Heart Forge, and the Heart Forge was made to answer the blade. That truth hit him hard, because it meant his path had been chosen long before he reached the fortress. Ben glanced at him and asked the question they were all thinking. Could the door be opened safely? Nora did not lie. She said yes, but only if the one who held the blade also held firm control. If fear ruled the hand, the forge might wake in chaos. If courage ruled it, the fortress could be saved. Before Aki could answer, the knock came a third time, and the metal door gave a faint shudder. Fine dust slid from the frame. Several runes on the border flashed once, then dimmed again. Somewhere above them, a distant rumble moved through the fortress, and the walls seemed to wake with it. The lower chamber was no longer sleeping, and whatever had been sealed away was now listening to every word they said. Then Victor finally showed himself again, but not with a loud attack. He appeared on a narrow iron ledge above the chamber, his black hair neat, his pale long coat untouched by dust, and his sharp face calm as stone. He looked down at them with controlled confidence, as if he had simply arrived to inspect a room he already owned. Victor had one clear motive, and he never hid it from himself. He wanted the Heart Forge because a fortress this old was not just a shelter to him. It was power, control, and a path to rule every locked chamber in Iron Haven. He believed order could only come from a single hand, and he trusted that hand most when it was his own. That belief made him dangerous because he could turn fear into a plan faster than most people could even think. He told Aki that the fortress was built for someone willing to claim it, not someone willing to protect it. He told Nora that the old seals were fragile and would fail if she kept hesitating. He told Ben that guards always lose when they try to defend the broken past, but Aki saw something Victor did not expect. The man had come too close to the chamber too fast. That meant Victor had already found another route through the fortress, and he had likely used the hidden stairways and side passages to circle around while they watched the door. Aki realized the villain had not been forced back because he was weak. He had been forced back because he was testing the fortress and learning how it reacted. That was the twist they needed to understand, and it changed everything. Victor had not run from the problem, he had been studying it. And if he was right about the old rules, he might have come to the lower chamber not to break the door but to trick them into opening it for him. Ben raised his weapon and took one step forward, but Victor only lifted one hand and smiled without warmth. Then a second sound rolled through the chamber, this time from the walls themselves. Iron chains deep inside the fortress shifted with a long, grinding sound, and the runes near the forge door began to glow brighter. The chamber reacted to the tension like a living thing. The ash blade pulsed, the door answered, and hidden panels in the floor opened with sharp clicks. Narrow vents released cold air, and old defense lines along the ceiling lit in a dull orange row by row. Iron Haven was beginning to wake its lower systems, and that made everyone stop for one brief, dangerous moment. Nora looked up in alarm and said the fortress had entered defense mode. That meant the Heart Forge was no longer just waiting, it was choosing whether to trust them or reject them. Aki felt that choice in his hands like a weight. He could press the blade into the socket and risk unleashing the wrong power, or he could step back and let Victor find another way to seize the chamber. Either choice had a cost. If they failed now, the fortress could seal shut again, trapping them beneath the earth with no safe way out. If Victor gained control, the hidden defenses could turn against the entire stronghold above, and the people in Iron Haven would pay for the greed of one cold man. The stakes were no longer private, they were bigger than the four of them, they were bigger than the chamber. Aki looked at Nora and she gave a small nod that told him she would stand with him. He looked at Ben and Ben held his ground like a wall. Then he spoke toward Victor and said the fortress was not a trophy, it was a promise. Victor answered that promises were only useful when they could be enforced. That was when he moved. He threw a thin black device toward the floor, and it burst into a cloud of dark grit that swallowed the center of the chamber. The shadow spread fast, dulling the lantern light and hiding the door from sight. Ben rushed forward to block Victor from reaching the forged door, and he cut through the haze with the ash blade, sending a bright ember line through the dark. Nora shouted for them not to let the shadow touch the runes, because if the seals were covered, the door might misread the room and lock all of them out. The chamber became a blur of motion, of boots sliding on stone, of metal striking metal, and of Victor trying to slip past the defense line he had helped awaken. He was clever, but the fortress was clever too, and it did not belong to him yet. Aki pushed through the haze and reached the forge door before Victor could claim it. The round socket in the center was now warm, almost hot, and the glowing runes around it beat with steady light. He could feel the old power beneath the stone, not angry, but waiting. Victor shouted that Aki was making a mistake because no one could command a fortress like this without force. Aki answered that force was exactly why so many things in Iron Haven had been broken for so long. Then he set the tip of the ash blade into the socket. The fit was exact. For one frozen second, nothing moved. Then the blade sank a little deeper and the entire lower chamber shook with a deep iron hum. Light poured through the carved symbols in the walls. The sealed door did not open fully, but it unlocked enough for a narrow line of darkness to appear down the center. A slow breath of hot air escaped from beyond it, carrying the smell of old metal and ancient fire. The knock stopped at once. That silence was worse than the sound had been, because now they knew something had heard them back. Nora stepped close and whispered that the Heart Forge was awake now, but only halfway. It had recognized Aki, yet it still tested him. Ben pulled Victor away from the socket area, forcing him back with raw strength while Victor tried to keep his balance and hide his anger. Victor did not look defeated, he looked frustrated, which was far more dangerous. He had learned enough to wait for another chance. Aki saw that clearly, and he finally understood the larger battle ahead. This was not only about opening a door, it was about deciding who had the right to guide the power under Iron Haven. Aki felt fear, but he did not let it rule him now. He stayed at the door, blade locked in place, while the fortress hummed around him. The hidden chamber had opened a first path, the shadows had been pushed back, and the story was only deepening. Somewhere beyond the narrow crack in the forge door, something ancient was waiting for the next command, and Victor was already planning how to steal it in the next move. Iron Haven felt like a living beast that night, with cold stone underfoot, iron dust in the air, and old lantern light flickering along the narrow stairwell. Deep below the broken courtyards and cracked walls, the fortress held its breath around Aki, as if it knew one wrong choice could wake something far older than any soldier above. The hidden chamber had already opened its first path, and now the forge door stood ahead like a sealed mouth, waiting for the next command. Aki was a young man with dark hair, dust-covered traveling clothes, a battered cloak and determined eyes, and he carried the ash blade with both fear and resolve. He had been afraid before, but now he understood the central danger clearly, because if the Heart Forge fell into the wrong hands, Iron Haven could become a trap for everyone inside it. Victor had come for control, not protection, and that made him dangerous in a way Aki could finally understand. Victor was a man with black hair, a pale, long coat, sharp features, and a calm, cold expression, and he wanted power because he believed only he could use it without hesitation. That belief made him patient, clever, and hard to stop because he always planned several moves ahead. Nora stood nearby, a woman with silver hair, a practical dark healer coat, light armor pieces, and alert eyes, and she wanted the truth beneath the fortress more than praise or rank. Ben guarded the rear, a man with brown hair, a broad frame, scratched guard armor, and a steady protective stance, because his first instinct was always to shield others from danger. He did not chase glory, but he mattered because he kept the group alive when fear pressed close. The forge door itself was massive and dark, with a round socket in the center and glowing runes around its frame, and the crack in it let out a low heat that touched the skin. Aki held the ash blade steady, and the ember-orange lines near its edge began to glow in answer, as if the sword remembered this place better than he did. Victor watched that glow with quiet hunger, because he had now seen enough to know the blade was not just a weapon. It was a key, yet the door did not open for greed alone. It needed a will that could steady the ancient power without being broken by it, and that truth was the first sign that the fortress still held a judgment of its own. Nora moved first because careful minds often noticed what proud eyes missed, and she knelt near the runes while keeping one hand on her coat. Her silver hair caught the lantern light as she studied the marks carved into the metal frame, and her face tightened when she saw the pattern repeat in a circle around the socket. She told Aki that the chamber was not built as a vault alone, but as a test chamber for the Heart Forge, a core power deep under Iron Haven that could awaken hidden defenses, open sealed paths, and lock down the whole fortress in one command. That explained the stakes at once, because anyone who mastered it could protect the people inside, or imprison them just as easily. Ben looked at the dark stair behind them and asked the question that mattered most, because he had seen too many strong places turn into tombs when the wrong leader got control. Who built this thing and why was it hidden? Nora rose slowly and answered with the same careful honesty that had guided her since the first chamber. She believed the forge had been sealed by the founders of Iron Haven, not to hide treasure, but to keep power from war-hungry hands. The fortress had been built after old battles had nearly destroyed the land above, and the Heart Forge was meant to defend families, not feed ambition. That answer made Victor smile a little because it did not surprise him. It confirmed what he had wanted all along, that the strongest prize in Iron Haven was real, ancient, and waiting for a master. He stepped closer, pale coat brushing the iron dust, and said he would use the forge better than anyone else. He spoke softly, almost kindly, which made his words worse because he was not shouting like a fool. He was choosing each word with care. Aki turned toward him, and for a moment the whole chamber seemed to narrow around their faces. Aki was still tired, still unsure, and still carrying old fear in his chest, but he had already learned that fear did not have to lead. He said the forge should protect people, not obey greed. Victor answered that people only respected power when it could crush resistance. That was the heart of the conflict now, plain and sharp. One side saw duty, the other side saw control. The ash blade pulsed once, and the crack in the forge door widened just enough to show a deeper room beyond, where ancient rings hung from the walls and faint symbols glimmered in the dark. It was a small opening, but it felt like a warning and an invitation at the same time. Victor moved as soon as he understood the door had weakened, and that was when the trap inside the chamber began to reveal itself. He did not rush straight in, because that would have been careless. Instead, he sent his own calm forward like a knife, studying the room, studying Aki, and studying the blade. Then he spoke again, this time offering what sounded like a deal. He said that Aki could keep his honor while Victor would take the burden of command, because some people were simply made to rule hidden power. It was a lie wrapped in order, and Nora saw through it at once. She warned Aki that Victor was trying to split the group by planting doubt, because if Aki hesitated, Victor could reach the socket and claim the forge himself. Ben stepped in front of Nora and Aki without a second thought, his broad frame filling the narrow stone space, because he understood that delay could be as dangerous as a blade strike. Then the fortress answered them. A deep hum rolled through the walls, and the iron rings in the lower chamber began to shake. Dust drifted from the ceiling, the lanterns swayed, and a line of light ran across the floor toward the forge door as if the whole place had sensed a choice. Aki felt the ash blade grow warmer in his hands, and that heat reached into his fear, not removing it but giving it shape. He remembered every hard step that had brought him here, every loss of trust, every wall he had walked past while searching for a way to stop stronger people from stealing what they did not understand. Then a new truth hit him, clear and sudden. The heart forge did not simply obey the nearest hand, it answered the clearest purpose. That meant Victor could not just seize it with force. He would have to prove himself worthy, and that was something greed had never taught him how to do. Victor noticed the change in Aki at once, and for the first time his calm expression cracked just a little. He had expected fear, hesitation, maybe even surrender. He had not expected Aki to stand straighter. Victor frowned, and that small expression revealed more than his cold voice ever had. He did not only want power for himself. He also feared a world where he was no longer the one shaping every outcome. That fear had driven him for a long time, long before Iron Haven, and now it was pushing him toward a desperate choice. He reached for the socket, but Aki moved first, not with rage, but with clear purpose. He pressed the ash blade into the round center of the forge door, and the dark metal slid into place with a deep metallic click. The orange lines in the blade flared bright, and the runes around the frame lit up in a circle of fire-colored light. The heavy door shuddered, then opened wider, and the hidden chamber beyond finally breathed out a wave of hot air and old iron scent. Inside, the heart forge waited in the dark, a vast core of stone, iron rings, and sealed mechanisms, all still and listening. It did not roar, it did not lash out, it simply watched. That was the twist that changed the path of the story, because the power under Iron Haven was not a beast at all. It was a judge. The forge had been built to respond to intent, and the ancient makers had left behind a test for anyone bold enough to awaken it. Nora understood it first, and her silver eyes widened as the meaning settled in. She said the forge must be awakened by a guardian, not a thief, because the fortress would only trust a hand that sought protection over control. Victor stared into the open chamber, and the first crack of real anger crossed his face. He had spent so long believing strength alone made him right that he could not accept a power built to reject him. He stepped forward anyway, reaching through the opening, but the heart forge answered with a ring of force that drove him back 2 steps. His pale coat flared in the hot air, and his boots scraped against the stone as he fought to keep his balance. The chamber did not injure him, but it made its judgment clear. His motive was exposed now. He wanted command because he could not bear being powerless again. That truth made him dangerous, but it also made him predictable. Aki kept the blade in place even as the heat climbed up his arms, because he now understood that the sword was not asking him to dominate the forge. It was asking him to trust it. Ben braced beside him, ready to pull him back if the strain became too much, while Nora watched the runes for any sign that the next step had begun. Then the floor under the chamber gave a low, heavy tremor, and a second set of symbols came alive deeper inside the heart forge. A hidden path had opened, but no one could yet see where it led. Aki looked at Victor, who was already studying the new light with a colder, sharper kind of patience, and both men understood that the next move would decide much more than one door. It would decide who had the right to wake the fortress, and who would be forced to retreat into the dark waiting below. The hidden chamber beneath Iron Haven felt even colder after the floor tremor settled, and the silence that followed was sharp enough to make everyone hold their breath. Red lantern light shook on the cracked walls of the Iron Haven lower chamber, and the iron rings in the stone seemed to stare back like old eyes. Aki stood at the edge of the new glow, still holding the ash blade in both hands, and the heat from the sword pulsed through his tired fingers. He was a young man with dark hair, dust-covered traveling clothes, a battered cloak, and determined eyes, and right now he looked like someone who had walked too far to turn back. Victor stood across from him with black hair, a pale long coat, and that same calm, cold expression that made every room feel smaller. He was the kind of man who never moved unless the move mattered, and he wanted the heart forge because he believed Iron Haven needed a single strong hand to wake its power before the fortress collapsed into ruin. Nora remained near the back wall, a woman with silver hair, a practical dark healer coat, light armor pieces, and alert eyes, watching both men and the runes at the same time because she knew the wrong choice could trap them all below forever. Ben, a broad man with brown hair, scratched guard armor, and a steady protective stance, kept himself between the others and the dark stairwell, ready to block danger before it reached anyone weaker. They had all entered Iron Haven for different reasons, but the problem now was simple and heavy. A hidden path had opened inside the Heart Forge, and if Victor took control of it first, he could wake the fortress defenses and rule every corridor above. If he failed to stop him, the people hiding in the broken upper halls could be trapped, cornered, or overwhelmed by the old machine power buried under their feet. The second set of symbols flared again, deeper under the metal door, and the glow climbed along the frame like fire running through stone. The forge door, a massive sealed metal door with a round socket in the center, was no longer dead. Its runes beat with a slow inner light, and each pulse matched the trembling in the floor. Nora stepped closer, then stopped when she saw the markings shift into a new pattern. She lifted one gloved hand and spoke in a low, careful voice, saying the symbols were not only a lock but also a warning system. She believed the Heart Forge had been built long ago by people who feared the fortress would be misused, so they made it choose its next master through tests, not force. That mattered because Iron Haven was not just stone and iron. It was a living defensive machine, and the wrong command could seal gates, release old weapons, or shut away whole sections of the fortress. Ben frowned because he did not like anything that sounded like a test made by dead builders, but he trusted Nora, and he trusted Aki more than he trusted Victor. Victor listened without showing anger, and that was what made him dangerous. He explained his motive with calm logic, saying the fortress had already suffered too much and weak hands would only leave it broken. He wanted control because he feared chaos more than conflict, and he believed his order was the only thing that could keep Iron Haven from falling apart under the weight of its own secrets. Aki heard the truth in that, but he also heard the danger. Victor was not trying to destroy the fortress. He was trying to own it before anyone else could decide its future. That made him a threat all the same. A sharp stone sound rolled from the opening below the door, and the hidden path began to breathe out cold air. It was not a wide tunnel, but a narrow stair cut into the rock, descending under the lower chamber like a wound in the earth. Old red lanterns flickered along the first few steps, and iron dust drifted in the draft like gray snow. Aki lifted the ash blade, and the orange lines near the edge brightened in answer. The sword had always felt strange in his hands, but here, inside the Heart Forge, it seemed to recognize the walls. The worn hilt warmed, and the blade pointed itself toward the stairwell as if it remembered the way. That was the first clear sign that the hidden path was meant for him, and Victor noticed it at once. He narrowed his eyes and said the sword was not just a weapon, but a key tied to the fortress power. Nora confirmed it after studying the runes, saying the ash blade matched the oldest markings in the chamber, and that meant someone had hidden it on purpose for a future guardian. That was the first twist in the chamber, and it changed everything. Aki had believed the blade was only a burden passed from hand to hand, a strange relic he had carried because he had no better choice. Now he understood that the sword was part of the fortress itself. It was not only opening doors. It was judging who should be trusted with what waited below. Victor took one step forward, and the light from the runes caught the edge of his pale coat. He said the blade did not matter as much as the person holding it, and if he could not make a hard choice, then Victor would do it for him. Ben moved first, planting himself in front of the stair opening, while Nora reached toward Aki and told him not to rush. Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes were wide because she could feel the old power rising under the chamber like a storm trapped in iron. Then the true danger arrived without warning. The iron rings in the walls shifted, one after another, and thin seams opened in the stone above the stairwell. From those seams came narrow armored shapes, old fortress sentries with dull metal faces and jointed arms, waking only enough to block the way. They were not alive in a normal way, and they did not bleed or cry out, but their movements were quick, cold, and final in purpose. They had been built to stop intruders, and now they mistook everyone in the chamber for intruders. Ben rushed forward with his shield arm raised, catching the first sentry and forcing it back against the wall before it could reach Nora. The clash rang through the chamber like a hammer striking a bell. Aki moved at the same time, the ash blade sweeping a glowing arc that shattered one of the sentry arms and sent sparks across the floor. Victor did not waste motion. He darted to the side, studied the rhythm of the machines, and used the opening they made to approach the stair. That was when Aki understood Victor had never meant to fight the sentries head-on. He had been waiting for them to wake so he could use their movement as cover. Victor wanted the chamber clear, and he did not care who got hurt if that brought him one step closer to the core. Nora saw the same thing and shouted for Ben to hold the left side while she searched for the control marks hidden in the wall. She pressed her hand against the cold stone, traced a pattern beneath the lantern light, and found a small broken sigil that had almost vanished under age. She told Aki to aim the ash blade at the socket in the forge door because the sword was not meant to force the lock, it was meant to complete it. Aki did not fully understand, but he trusted her. He turned, raised the sword, and drove the glowing edge toward the round center of the door as the sentries pushed harder behind him. The moment the ash blade touched the socket, the chamber changed. A deep hum rolled through Iron Haven, and the sealed metal door responded like a sleeping giant waking in pain. The runes around the frame lit in a full circle, and the hidden stairwell below shone with bright orange lines that raced downward into the dark. For one breath, everyone froze. Then a voice, low and distant, rose from inside the walls, not human and not machine, but something in between. It said the heart forge would open only for the one who bore the burden of restraint, not the hunger of control. Victor heard that and stiffened because the words were clearly meant for a key. Yet his face did not show surrender. Instead, he revealed the second part of his plan. He had not come to the chamber only to claim power. He had come because he believed someone inside the fortress had already betrayed the upper halls, and he wanted the Heart Forge to expose them before they could destroy Iron Haven from within. That was the revelation that hit Aki hardest. Victor was ruthless, but he was not acting for greed alone. He feared a hidden enemy, and he believed command was the only way to stop a larger disaster. The problem was that his fear made him willing to use anyone as a tool. Aki felt the weight of that truth, and for a moment he understood Victor too well. Both of them wanted to protect people, but one of them trusted control, while the other trusted courage and choice. That difference mattered more than either of them wanted to admit. The sentries kept pressing, and Ben was pushed back a step, his guard armor scraping the stone. Nora caught his arm and pulled him clear of a falling shard of metal. The chamber trembled again, harder this time, and the hidden path below the door widened just enough for one person to enter. The Heart Forge had made its choice clear, but it had not yet revealed the full reason behind it. Aki took a slow breath, and for the first time since entering Iron Haven, he stopped thinking only about winning. He looked at Ben, who was still standing firm despite the pressure. He looked at Nora, who had used careful thought instead of fear. He looked at Victor, who stood cold and straight, carrying a heavy belief that control could save everyone. Aki finally understood that he did not need to become like Victor in order to oppose him. He needed to become clearer, kinder, and stronger at the same time. That was his change, and it came from seeing what the fortress demanded. He lowered the ash blade a little, then raised his voice and told Victor that power without trust would only lock Iron Haven into another prison. Victor did not answer right away. He only watched the open stair and the bright runes below, as if he was already measuring the next move. Then he said that trust was a luxury for safer times, and safer times had already ended. Before Aki could reply, a new sound moved up from the hidden path, a soft grinding noise like a second door unlocking deeper below. Nora turned pale because she recognized the pattern. The Heart Forge had not finished opening. It had only opened the first gate. Ben tightened his grip and asked what waited under the next level, but no one had an answer yet. The ancient voice in the wall faded, and the light from the door shifted from orange to a deeper, hotter gold. Somewhere below, another system had accepted the ash blade, and something far older than the sentries was now stirring awake. Aki stepped toward the stairwell, not because he was sure, but because he was finally willing to act without knowing everything. Victor watched him with cold focus, and Nora and Ben moved in beside him, ready to follow into the dark. The hidden path had chosen its moment, but it had not chosen its final witness, and the next descent would decide who truly understood the Heart Forge before the fortress woke fully above them. Iron Haven sat in heavy silence beneath the cracked sky, and the fortress walls looked like they had been wounded by long years of war. Broken stone, bent railings, and blackened metal all held the same cold feeling, as if the place had forgotten how to rest. Deep below those ruined halls, the air grew colder, the lantern light turned red and weak, and the hidden stairwell waited with patient darkness. Aki stood at the top of those stairs with the ash blade in his hand, and he knew the danger was no longer only above them. Something ancient was waking below, and if it reached full strength before anyone understood it, then Iron Haven would become a cage for everyone still inside it. Victor knew that too, but he wanted the power for himself. Nora wanted the truth before more lives were caught in the middle. Ben wanted to keep everyone standing long enough to survive the next few minutes. and Eki, tired as he was, had finally chosen to move even though he still did not understand enough. Eki stepped down first, and the stairwell answered with a low, hollow sound under his boots. He was a young man with dark hair, dust-covered traveling clothes, and a battered cloak that hung from his shoulders like he had been carrying the road itself. His eyes were determined now, but they still held the strain of too many hard choices. The ash blade gave off a faint orange heat, and its old worn hilt felt rough in his grip, as if it had been waiting for his hand long before he was born. Behind him came Nora, a woman with silver hair, a practical dark healer coat, light armor pieces, and sharp, alert eyes that never stopped watching the walls. She carried bandages, small tools, and a careful mind that noticed what others missed. Ben followed next, a man with brown hair, a broad frame, scratched guard armor, and a steady protective stance that made the dark seem a little less large. Victor came last, a man with black hair, a pale long coat, sharp features, and a calm cold expression that never changed, no matter how close danger came. He wanted the Heart Forge because he believed control was the only way to survive the world above, and he had decided long ago that mercy made weak leaders. That was why he mattered, because his fear of chaos had become a hunger for power. The four of them moved lower into Iron Haven, each one carrying a different reason, and each one knowing the next chamber could change everything. The Iron Haven stairwell twisted deeper than it should have, and the red lanterns along the wall seemed too old to still be burning. Their light flickered over cracked stone, iron dust, and marks from ancient tools that had scraped these steps in another age. The air tasted dry and metallic, and every sound seemed to sink into the walls instead of echoing back. Nora ran one hand over a carved symbol and stopped because the shape was not random. It was part of a warning pattern, a guide system built to wake the fortress only under the right command. Ben leaned over her shoulder and frowned, while Aki watched the ash blade brighten by a small amount, as if it recognized the symbols. Victor saw all of it and said nothing at first, but his eyes narrowed just a little. Then he spoke in a smooth, level voice and said the stairs were not just hiding the forge, they were measuring the heart of whoever walked them. He said the Heart Forge could not be used by greed alone because it responded to intention, memory, and pressure from the fortress itself. Nora looked at him sharply and asked how he knew that. Victor only answered that some doors taught their secrets to the patient. That was the first crack in his silence, and Aki understood that Victor had known far more than he admitted. The group kept moving, but the stairwell had already changed from a path into a test. Halfway down, the hidden path opened into a lower chamber, and the change in the room hit them at once. The Iron Haven lower chamber was wide and square, with old battle marks cut into the floor, iron rings set into the walls, and a sealed metal door on the far side that looked far older than the fortress above. Glowing ancient symbols drifted across the stone around that forge door, faint at first, then stronger as the ash blade came closer. Aki stopped in front of it because the blade in his hand had grown hot enough to feel alive. The orange lines near its edge pulsed once, and then the round socket in the center of the forge door answered with a deep hum. Nora gasped softly and stepped back, not because she was afraid of the sound, but because she saw the pattern forming around the door. The forge was waking in stages, and each stage needed a matching key. Ben moved between Aki and Victor without thinking, because his body had learned to protect before his mind could catch up. Victor, however, smiled in a small and unreadable way. He said the blade had finally led them to the true lock, and he told Aki that the Heart Forge had been built to defend Iron Haven, but also to choose who would command it when the fortress was threatened. Then he said the part that changed everything. The ash blade was not simply a weapon. It was a keeper key made from the forge itself, and it had been split away from the Heart Forge long ago to stop one ruler from bending the fortress to his will. Aki stared at him, and the truth landed hard because it meant the blade had not only chosen him, it had been calling him toward this room from the start. Before anyone could answer, the lower chamber shuddered and the walls gave a low metallic groan. The symbols around the forge door glowed brighter, then dimmed, then flashed again in uneven waves. Somewhere far above, deep within the fortress, heavy systems began to move with a sound like distant gears turning after a very long sleep. Nora knelt and pressed her hand to the floor, then looked up with worry in her eyes. She said the forge was not just awakening, it was reacting to a second presence. Something else was speaking to it. Ben gripped his weapon tighter and asked if that meant another creature was coming down the stairs. Nora shook her head and said it was worse than that, because this presence felt old, broken, and linked to the same control network as the forge itself. Victor turned his head slowly, and for the first time his calm face showed something like strain. He admitted that the Heart Forge had a guardian system, but he had believed it was silent. He had come to Iron Haven to seize the forge before anyone else could misuse it, because he feared that if the fortress woke on its own, the power would choose the wrong hand and lock the whole city into endless conflict. He wanted control not for greed alone, but because he believed fear justified command. That made him dangerous, but it also made him understandable, and that was worse in some ways. Aki felt the truth settle between them like a heavy stone. Victor was not lying about the threat, but he was still willing to take the forge by force if needed. That meant the real battle might not be against the dark below. It might be against the man standing beside them. The chamber lights suddenly snapped brighter, and a thin line of white fire ran across the floor toward the forge door. The ash blade responded at once, and Aki nearly lost his grip as heat surged through his arms. The round socket in the door opened with a sharp metal click, and a slow wave of air rolled out from the seam, carrying the smell of iron, ash, and old stone. Everyone froze. Then the door moved a little, not fully opening, but enough to show that the Heart Forge was still alive and waiting. A low voice seemed to rise from somewhere inside the metal walls, not spoken with words, but felt through the bones. Nora understood at first. She whispered that the forge was asking for a bearer, not a master. It wanted someone who would guard, not rule. Victor heard the same thing, and his jaw tightened because the answer did not match his plan. He stepped forward anyway and reached for the door, but Ben blocked him with one arm and held firm. For a moment, the two men stared at each other in the dim light, one cold with purpose and one solid with loyalty. Aki raised the ash blade, and the sword glowed brighter against his fear. He did not know if he was ready, but he knew the difference between wanting power and being chosen by responsibility. So he placed the tip of the blade into the round socket, and the entire chamber shuddered in answer. The forge accepted the weapon, but instead of opening fully, it sent a pulse through the room that showed a hidden map of Iron Haven below them. Nora saw a second chamber still deeper under the fortress, sealed off by a broken chain of control marks. Ben saw routes that could lead enemies into the heart of the stronghold. Victor saw a path that could give him command if he reached it first, and Aki saw one clear thing above all else. The Heart Forge was not fully awakened yet, and whatever was stirring with it had not finished speaking. The light in the chamber began to fade, but before it went dark, one final shape appeared in the glowing marks around the forge door. It was a crest, old and damaged, and it matched a symbol carved into Victor's ring. Nora noticed it at the same time Aki did, and her eyes widened with sudden understanding. Victor had not only studied the forge, he had family ties to the people who once guarded it. That was the twist that sharpened the whole room, because it meant his cold plan was not built from nothing. It was built from a broken legacy, fear, and a long desire to reclaim what his line had lost. Victor finally spoke the truth in a quiet voice. He said his family had once served as wardens of Iron Haven, but their warning had been ignored, and the fortress had nearly fallen because the wrong leaders wanted to use the forge as a weapon. He had spent years learning the old systems so he could prevent that mistake from happening again. He believed that if he did not seize the Heart Forge first, someone worse would. Aki listened, and for the first time he saw Victor not as a simple enemy, but as a man who had let fear harden into control. That did not make his choices right, but it made them human. The chamber shook once more, stronger than before, and dust fell from the ceiling in a thin gray rain. Somewhere below them, another door was opening, or another guardian was stirring. Ben pulled Aki back from the socket, and Nora grabbed the ash blade before the heat could burn his hand. They were not safe yet, and they were not finished. But now they knew one hard truth. The Heart Forge was waking because it had chosen this moment to test everyone, and the next descent would reveal whether Aki could carry that choice, whether Victor would betray the others for control, and whether Iron Haven would rise as a shield or collapse into a trap. As the chamber door groaned and the shadows deepened again, the four of them stood ready, staring into the deeper dark, knowing the story had only just opened its next door. The underground chamber felt colder than the rest of Iron Haven, and every wall seemed to listen as the four of them stepped forward. Aki, a tired young man with dark hair and a battered cloak, held the ash blade with both hands and tried to stay calm. Nora, a woman with silver hair and a dark healer coat, watched the symbols on the stone. Ben, a broad man with brown hair and scratched guard armor, stood close to them, ready to block any danger. Victor, a man with black hair and a pale long coat, wore that same cold look, but his eyes kept drifting toward the sealed forge door. The heart of the problem was now clear. The Heart Forge had awakened because it was testing who could protect Iron Haven, and if the wrong person claimed it, the fortress defenses could turn against everyone inside. Nora said the old forge was not just a machine, but a judge built by ancient hands to choose a true guardian. Victor heard that, and his calm face sharpened because he wanted control more than safety. He believed Iron Haven should obey one strong ruler, even if that ruler was him. When Iki placed the ash blade into the round socket, the room gave a deep, heavy hum. The runes around the forge door lit one by one, and hidden iron rings rose from the floor. Then the twist came. The forge did not answer Victor or Ben, and it did not even answer Nora. It answered Iki alone because the blade carried the last trace of the first guardian, a man who had once sealed the forge to keep greedy hands away. Iki realized the blade was never a weapon for conquest. It was a key meant for mercy and restraint. Victor stepped back first, and then he made his choice. He tried to seize the glowing blade, but Ben moved in front of him, steady and unmoving, while Nora shouted that the forge was already selecting a defender. The chamber shook, the door opened, and hidden systems woke across Iron Haven. Stone barriers rose in the broken courtyards above, and metal shutters slammed into place before the outer walls could fail. Victor saw that the fortress would not bend to force, and for the first time his control slipped away. Iki did not strike back with anger. He held the blade steady, breathed through his fear, and let the forge finish its judgment. The shadows pulled back, the chamber quieted, and Iron Haven stood protected instead of trapped. Victor was forced to retreat. Nora smiled with tired relief, and Ben let out a slow breath. Iki was no longer just the one who carried the burden. He was the one who could be trusted to guard the light inside the dark.